Da-da-da-da. If you may, please. Shh. Okay. It's my great pleasure and honor to be here today to introduce our keynote speaker for today. And I'm Raija Hämäläinen, and I have been serving EARLI for last 4 years as a portfolio holder for awards and activities. And I can truly say that today we are here for the future of EARLI, because Fernando was the winner of the Outstanding Publication Award in 2003. And it is a tradition that always the winner will be invited to give a keynote in the following conference. And that's why we are here now. And when I received the CV of Fernando, I was truly impressed and at the same time very convinced that in EARLI we don't have to be worried, because like his review study, it was very high quality, and during the conference there has been some concerns and discussions about the future of the review studies, whether they are needed because of the AI. And actually, I think that they are needed more than ever, because AI can do such a good thing in making things visible, at the same time making the kind of like a theoretical understanding better between the humans. That's something that we need high quality review studies for. And in addition to that, all the things that Fernando has been doing is that he has been interested in the school dropout, youth stress, motivation, skill development, and also different kind of methodological approaches that he has been developing. He has been active in teaching, supervision, peer reviewing, which is like one of the very crucial element of the research. And I would still like to highlight the importance of reviewing. And furthermore, he's also serving as a editorial board member. He received his PhD in 2018, and currently he is a postdoctoral researcher on motivation, learning, and teacher feedback. And last but definitely not least, he's also a very proud father of 2-year-old. Ooh. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you, Fernando, and give the floor for you. Please go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this lovely introduction. So my name is Fernando Nuñez-Regueiro. You can pronounce it several ways if you do as you can. And today I'll be talking about reciprocal effects and the evidence we get for reciprocal effects in terms of causal interpretation. She mentioned the importance of meta-analyses and reviews, but what is the evidence we use as a basis for these reviews? Before I start, I'd just like to say that I'm currently affiliated at the Laboratoire de Recherche sur les apprentissages en contexte, which in English means Contextual Learning Research Lab, which is a very dynamic lab situated in the French Alps, and which is part of the Université of Grenoble Alpes in France. So this is the contents I will focus upon. First, I will try to provide some context on what are questions about reciprocal effects. Then we will discuss the standard way we provide the evidence for reciprocal effects, before trying to have a critical view on these methods and what they imply for our field of research in learning and instruction. So there are many different contexts where we're interested in analyzing how two constructs, which evolve over time, influence each other. So for example, when we look at constructs relating to self, whether they be self-concept or motivation, emotions, we see that they usually, we are interested in knowing whether they influence skills acquisition or achievement. So in this case, if we look at feelings of competence, we we're interested in knowing whether it fuels the desire to learn and persevere because you feel competent. But we also have the causal effect in the other direction, which is that when you achieve well and you perform well, you get a feelings of competence. So that's an example of bidirectional causality we're interested in investigating. Another example can be found in the field of basic literacies. We know that exposure to words by reading, if you read, if you're familiar, if you practice reading a lot, you will be more exposed to the spelling of words, and therefore you will acquire the knowledge of words, of how they're spelled. But at the same time, if you have that knowledge, it also helps you to read faster and more fluently. So then again, bidirectional causality. Another example in the field of teaching motivation and engagement. If you lack feelings of teaching efficacy or support from your colleagues, it will drain your energy and you might have feelings of burnout, such as exhaustion, cynicism, inadequacy. But at the same time, exhaustion might be a catalyzer of your erosion of feelings of self-efficacy. And you might even lose support from your colleagues because you're always exhausted. So these are all what you can frame as chicken-egg questions. And the question is, can we solve them? In this keynote, I will focus on the example of reciprocal effects between self-constructs such as self-concept and skills, but it generalizes to other contexts, of course. And I will not be solving the chicken-egg question today, because we already know that it's the chicken that came first, right? So that's solved. So what kind of evidence do we need to answer these questions? The straight answer would be we need causal evidence, because we're not merely looking at covariations. We want to know if variation in one construct leads to variations in the other construct, induces variations. And I want to just upfront get something out of the way, which is in our field we are reasonably cautious with using the word causal, but sometimes excessively cautious. And it comes to a point where we try never to use causal language in the research we present. But at the same time, our theories are causal. When we say that a kind of teaching practice supports learning, we actually mean that if we modify teachers' behavior, it will enhance learning. So that's causal. And also, if we don't go into the grounds of causal evidence, we risk falling into circular reasoning, which is something we often come by when we read articles. So often what we can find is we have an introduction that makes causal claims based on the theory. So for example, motivation fosters learning. Then we have research design that cannot really provide evidence for causality, perhaps because it's a cross-sectional design. But then the results are interpreted causally based on the theory. So we're really using the theory to corroborate the theory. We're not using the evidence. And that's a circular reasoning that can be undermining to our field. So if we need causal evidence, there are, of course, two major ways. The first one is using experimental data, and the other is using observational data. There might be other kinds, but I will focus on these kind of data. So in our case study of reciprocal effects between self and skills, we could look at whether developing a treatment that boosts self, which would be considered the cause, can impact skills. And we would have two groups, have a treatment condition, the experimental group, and contrast the outcomes in skills afterwards and see if there is an effect. But there are, of course, limitations to this design. It is often very difficult to implement. Boosting self-concepts it's very difficult, even if you do it in a long way, because it might not modify how students actually perceive themselves, for example. It is often unidirectional, and we may also wonder whether it generalizes to ordinary learning situations. Because, for example, in this case of self-concept development, what we do in the intervention might not reflect what happens in everyday learning situations, where there are several other factors of self-perception development. So the other approach, so I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's more difficult. So the other approach we have is with the observational data. In this approach, we can measure evolutions in self and skills and try to model their relations over time. So for example, we could have a research design where we measure both constructs on 3 occasions. For example, it could be math self-concept and math skills at the beginning of the school year, middle of school year, end of school year. And we can assimilate data to work this example. What we see here is the distributions of these variables standardized to zero means and unit variance. You see the individual trajectories, so you can get a sense of where the students go over time in these constructs. So there's dynamic evolutions. So now we have our data. We'll see how we can model their relations. So first we could look at the correlation. So on this simulated data, I insist on this, it's a simulation, we see that there's a positive correlation. But of course we know that correlation does not imply causation. So we were not answering our question. Second, we could look at longitudinal relations. And we could, if we estimate on this simulated data the effect of self-concept on time 1, on skills at time 2, we see that there's a positive effect which is significant. So we might say that self-concept has a positive influence on skills. Self-concept explains future variations in skills. That would be causal language. But in fact, this is not, the design we have here is not sufficient to use this causal language. Because if we adjust for prior states, we see that when we adjust prior states, the effect of self-concept on skills disappears. And we actually see that it's the reciprocal effect which is positive and significant. So we have a reverse causality appearing in this design, which seems to imply that skills have a positive influence on self-concept and is the driver of their co-evolutions. So the takeaway, so this is, I will provide critical insights on this. I'm just saying that this is how we usually see things. Prediction alone does not imply causation unless we adjust for prior states and reciprocal effects. So what I just presented is what is commonly known as the cross-lag panel model. In this model, we have autoregressive effects that control for endogenous development, how past states in a construct predict future variations in the same construct. We have covariances that try to adjust for common confounder or common sources of variation on a measurement point. And then we have the cross-lag effects, which are the effects of most scientific interest for causal inference. And this design has provided much of the causal evidence in education with different patterns. We have patterns of bidirectional causality, such as in the reciprocal effects model. We have patterns of unidirectional causality. In this case, teacher burnout seems to be the driver of the erosion of teaching resources and not the other way around. And we also have sequential bidirectional causality, which is that the causal influence evolves over time as students acquire different skills. So for example, spelling skills seem to be driving the relation from kindergarten to grade 1, and afterwards it's the other way around. It's reading skills that predict or induce changes in spelling skills. The problem is that the CLPM, the cross-lag panel model, confounds short and long-term changes. And this became apparent approximately 10 years ago with these two major publications, which I will try to explain in substance. So what are short-term and long-term changes? So consider the axis of time and skills. We're trying to see evolutions in skills. So this is the evolution of an individual over time. The skills develop fastly at the beginning, and then they may settle down and become sort of trait-like. They will not change much over time. So that's what we could call long-term changes. So that's the long-term changes. But if we look on a specific time point, observational window, we might see that there are variations around traits. So if we make different measures on time 1, time 2, time 3, there might be variations around these traits. And these variations are what we commonly call dynamic states around the traits. And this is what I will refer to short-term changes. So to fix ideas again, now we have a design. We return to our simulated data. So we have this character, which you probably know. It's Lisa Simpson. She's a high-achieving student. She loves school. She performs well. So in terms of skills, she's above average, and she always scores quite high on these 3 measurement points. And if we try to look at the trait level, we see that she has oscillations around this trait level. Now is her brother Bart, which is not in the same situation at all. So Bart doesn't really like school. He prefers doing skateboard and other things. And he's underperforming. He's performing below the average. So the average here is situated at 0. He's performing below average. And he also has an hypothetical trait level, which is also below average. So the between-person variance relates to the variability in traits, the long-term changes. It's between-person because each individual only has a single trait. There's no variability in this trait. So all the variance is between individuals. But each individual has variations around his or her own trait. And that's what we will call the within-person variance, the variability in states. Now, what happens if we cancel out the differences in traits between Bart and Lisa? So to do that, we will just adjust their traits. So before canceling the traits, Lisa is always performing better than Bart. So we could say that dynamically she seems to always perform better, and she has more positive dynamics. But if we cancel the trait level by reducing them to 0, we actually see that Lisa outperforms Bart on time 1, but then it seems to be the other way around, where Bart seems to perform a bit better relative to its own traits. So this is just an illustration to explain why trait level differences can obscure state dynamics. And this is what may affect reciprocal effects as well. And to investigate this, we need to augment the cross-lat panel model with inclusion of random intercepts that capture the trait factors, the variance associated with traits. So on the left, you have the intercepts, so a constant that each individual has that captures his level in terms of traits. And then on the right, you have the residuals, the deviations from these baseline levels or traits. And that's where we want to model the dynamics and the reciprocal influences between the constructs. Importantly, there's a correlation between traits. And this correlation reflects the idea that if we do the same thing with the measures of self, so we have a trait self for Lisa and a trait self for Bart, we'll often see that high traits in skills in one construct often go with high traits in the other constructs, in self-concept in this case. And the major point, and this is where we need to think twice when we use these cross-lat panel models, is that if the correlation between traits is large but it is ignored, the parameters we will get from the standard CLPM will probably be misleading. So returning to our simulated data. Before we showed that with the CLPM we found that there was a unidirectional effect of skills on self-concept. And the actual simulation model for the data was this one, where there's a reverse causality, where it is self that influences skills, and there's a negative effect. So how come we have the exactly contradictory evidence on causality with the same data? And the answer is something that has been called the convergence effect, which is that the CLPM effects are a weighted product of within and between person effects. So in this case, the between person effects are relate to the effects between dynamic states, and the between factor of variance comes from the trade correlation. So for example, in this contrast between the simulation data and the CLPM results, we see that we have a positive correlation that is amalgamated with a negative correlation, and this yields a non-significant effect when we use the CLPM that conflates the two sources of variance. Similarly, for the other effects, we have a positive correlation with a null effect that yields a positive CLPM effect of skills on self-concept. So that's an illustration of the convergence effect that happens in the CLPM that amalgamates between and within person variance. And in the literature, we find a lot of research that shows that when we contrast these two models, we don't always get the same information about causal influences. So here we have a couple of examples. In the first one, between academic self-concept skills, when we use the CLPM, they have bidirectional influences, but when we use the RI CLPM, there's nothing. Teacher self-efficacy, autonomous motivation also have bidirectional effects with the work engagement and grade point average, that the bidirectional causality disappears when we use the RI CLPM. So mostly what we find in literature is that when there are differences between these two models, the effects remain in the same direction. So if it's positive, it will remain positive, but it will be one or the two effects that will disappear. But in some rare instances, here it's from developmental studies, we have an illustration by Pritzker that shows that the relations can even reverse when we contrast the two models. So in this example, it's an example between spanking and externalizing behavior. So if we use the CLPM, we can conclude that spanking can reinforce externalizing behavior, and therefore we should not do it. And if we use the RI CLPM, we get to the conclusion that we should spank a little more our children in order to minimize their externalizing behavior. So the takeaway is that the CLPM may be unreliable to infer causality, and it is safer to disaggregate trade and state factors when we are looking into causal inferences. So what does that imply for our field of research? This critique in a nutshell says that previous evidence that was based on the standard CLPM may be spurious due to state-trade confounding. And of course, if the evidence from the studies may be spurious, then the meta-analytical evidence based on those studies may be spurious as well. And the bad news, or is that the critique applies even more strongly on models that have lesser adjustments than the CLPM. So the first model here, the residualized change model, is when you control for baseline levels in one construct to see if another construct influences future variations. And also in longitudinal mediation analysis without trade state disaggregation. So my feelings a couple of years ago, even a bit before, was that, so how we've been chasing shadows of this whole time? What is this evidence we are building our thoughts and theories upon? Do we need to get rid of those theories on worse drop them in the bin or burn them? And is it time to quit and look for another job and passion than research in education and learning? But of course, with time, we get more reasonable, and I think now that we have some reasons not to quit yet. And there are several reasons for that. First, the related crisis I just presented may be overstated or may not be as strong as we might think. First of all, in many other studies, the results from both kind of models, the CLPM and the RI-CLPM, they converge. So here you have other examples where the effects go in the same way in the two kinds of modeling, whether it be in relations between math skills and reading skills, academic concepts and skills, or positive emotions and skills. So there's a convergence. It doesn't mean that all the data and all the theories or the evidence we have does not work. We just need to test that it does work the same way in the RI-CLPM. Second, in the convergence effect, I explained that part of the illusory effects in the CLPM were due to the correlation between traits. But now this correlation itself may be the byproduct of past actual reciprocal influences between the constructs. So just because the effects do not disappear, just because the effects we know may disappear in the RI-CLPM does not mean they do not exist at all. What it does say is that we may need to reassess when we measure these reciprocal influences, because if the trait correlation captures all the reciprocal influences when we adjust for it, it might mean that we're looking at the reciprocal influences too late in development. We need to go earlier in development to actually capture the reciprocal effects before the trait correlations become too large. This critique is also an opportunity for theoretical precision. And in the past couple of years, there have been several publications that quite boldly told us that our theories lacked precision, and they were often unfalsifiable. They are redundant as well, because if you do not make strong claims on which process, on which time scale, and in which causal ordering it happens, you can actually explain a lot of things without ever getting tested against. And because of this redundancy, we have a lot of theories that evolve in isolation, in silos, Reinhard had said, because they are self-sustaining, they can explain everything, because they're not precise enough. So what we need to do with this critique is take it as an opportunity to be more precise about what we are telling in these theories. First of all, by integrating state and trait dynamics, have conceptualized when do traits emerge, how they might emerge, are they real, do they reflect other aspects of development that are not traits, be precise about causal ordering, be precise about the timescales of evolutions, and how they relate to other theories, and how theories might capture a specific landscape of the general picture. The third reason why we need not to quit yet is that the trait-state separation we use in the RI-CLPM is quite rigid and might not be the best fit to the data. It's the clearest model to infer causality, but there are other models that might reflect the data better. So, for example, there are alternatives to this model, such as the LCSM, the latent change score model, which conceives state and traits as entangled in their dynamics. In that case, the traits are an accumulating factor that accumulates state changes over time. We also have other conceptualizations that model growth in addition to intercepts in the between-person variance. in which case we might infer that state dynamics really refer long-term changes and trends over time. And there are, of course, many other nuances, and to me, one of the most enlightening papers that I know of is this one by Satoshi Usami, Ko Murayama, and Ellen Hamaker, where they really contrast every kinds of, or major kinds of contrast between these longitudinal models and what they involve in terms of how we conceive of processes of change. Now, to wrap it up, I would just like to sketch a roadmap to seize this opportunity and turn this critique into a positive growth. First of all, I think that it's really critical that we clarify the distinction between predicting a phenomenon and explaining in terms of causal inference. So the prediction is, of course, useful for forecasting. If we want to know who will perform better, probably we can look at how they feel in terms of self-concept today, and we'll be quite accurate in whether they perform better than their peers who do not see themselves as very high-performing. But if we want a causal explanation, we need more robust designs which can really inform the the fundamental research on the causality behind. That also drive our interventions. When we do interventions, we're in a causal framework. And I think that the two, prediction and explanation, can coexist, but they answer different questions and they require different models. And importantly, that's why I think we really need to stick to explanation to build theories, is that prediction and explanation may not go in the same direction, and they may even provide a very reverse interpretation, as these two examples, the simulation data and the Pritzker example, showed. The second point of this roadmap is to think in terms of timescales. Ellen Hamaker proposed this timescale continuum recently, which formalizes the different timescales of evolutions within the same construct. And there are very dynamic fluctuations that may occur in day-to-day or moment-to-moment variations, and elements that are much more stable over the years, over the decades, which may resemble traits. And if we want to move forward and integrate this critique, I think the theories can gain from augmenting their claims in terms of how they view the emergence of traits and how they view the state dynamics, and really conceptualize them in terms of timescales to situate them differently. There are timescales of processes, but there are also timescales of effects, and these are recent advances in the modeling of these reciprocal effects. So what we will call long-term effects or lagged effects or slow effects are effects that are lagged over time, so they relate constructs from one measurement to another. But recent modeling advances now allow us to envisage that maybe they are contemporaneous, and they are faster than we think, and they are faster than the time interval between the measurements. That's the main point. And importantly, this can also inform theory. And in this illustration by Herbert Marsh and colleagues, for example, they showed that the reciprocal influences between academic self-concept and skills acquisition did not respond to the same temporalities. They had different speeds. So skills had a contemporaneous effect. If you perform well on one occasion, you will very likely soon feel a bit better about how you perform at school. But the other way around, the effect of self-concept on skills takes perhaps longer to evolve, because there are intermediate processes that need to be changed, for example, in terms of engagement behavior, in terms of how you identify with the learning goals at school, your kind of motivation you have. This takes more time to change, and that's why it is lagged over time. So if you have a design that has fixed measurement points, the reciprocal influences might take different temporalities, be contemporaneous or lagged. And the third point I want to add to this roadmap is that it is probably very informative to adopt a comparative modeling framework. And of course, you probably saw different studies that already did that. But I think we need to continue on that path, and perhaps start with the state trait disaggregation hypothesis with the random intercept CLPM, but then compare it to alternatives to probe the effects we identify with this method. So for example, we could see if the reciprocal effects we find with the random intercept CLPM holds when we relax the state trait disaggregation. For example, if we allow them to be entangled over time, it might be informative to see that. We could also check whether the reciprocal influences are driven by residual occasion-specific variance that we're not modeling, or even by a latent third variable confounder. And here you have an illustration. In this model on the right, you make the hypothesis that the reciprocal effects are actually driven by a third variable confounder. And we're still in a state trait disaggregation paradigm. And we could contrast these two models to see, test the robustness of the reciprocal effects we find. So in this case, with the reciprocal effects model, we found that they were robust to all these alternatives. So this is the roadmap. I think we can adopt in the years to come, and of course, many of you have already integrated all these steps. And before I finish, I would just like to acknowledge a few people that were influential in making this keynote and in shaping my mind on these issues. First, Jacques Jouel, who is perhaps one of the strongest specialists on structural equation modeling and dynamic processes in psychology in France. My colleagues from my lab, Pascal Bressou, Cécile Nurat, and Erika De Vries, who's here, for really helping me with the research and this keynote presentation as well. Two people you might know as well, Herbert Marsh and Reinhard Pekrun, who offer me an opportunity to discuss these issues in more depth and with very stimulating exchanges, and I'm very grateful for that. And Jaime Leon, who was also very influential in moving forward with these analyses, even proposing extensions to multi-level RI-CLPM, which we managed to do, but even though it was effortful. But I'm very grateful to all these people, and I would just like to leave this slide for a moment as I finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernando. It was super interesting. And we have some time for the questions and comments.
So thank you so much, Fernando, for this intriguing programmatic speech, right? You focused on the random intercept cross-like panel model, right? So the classic cross-like panel model has been criticized for confounding between and within person variance. And I think this critique is justified, right? Now, the random intercept model, what it's doing is looking into the deviation of individual scores from the person's average. Mm-hmm. So that would be a within-person perspective. But then subsequently, these within-person deviations are regressed over time on previous within-person deviations from a between-person perspective. It's a between-person regression, right? So the random intercept model also, in a way, confounds within and between person variance, right? And the second problem is it does so in terms of looking into fixed effects, neglecting the possibility that these relations just vary across individuals, right? What would be your perspective on that? And I mean, there are alternatives such as dynamic structure equation modeling.
Thank you for this very difficult question, these two very difficult questions. But right on point, I think, so currently I think there's a very, a constructive debate on the status of these trait factors, what they mean, are they illusory, are they capturing illusory processes that are not personality traits per se, but other processes that confound, either time-varying or time-invariant confounders that appear as traits when we model as the RI CLPM. And so from what I gather from this debate is that even though we're not very clear on what is the ontological status of the traits, we are still, it is still an advantage to include them in the model to try and identify reciprocal effects and try to infer causality from them. Now what you just said from the fact that, if I understood correctly, that the reciprocal effects, if you regress and move earlier into the pathways, you will find that they converge with the traits, right? Is that part of what you were saying? That they might be causally related to traits initially?
I mean, what we are having in the random intercept model is regression of within-person deviations from the person mean over time using between-person regression analysis, right, basically?
Yes.
And wouldn't there then be an alternative to look into the within-person relations over time between variables using alternative approaches?
Yes. So
to really, I mean, counter the critique that we are confounding between and within-person variance, right? So really, I mean, truly idiographic analysis, if you will.
Yes. Okay. So going to the demographic versus idiographic analysis, and I totally agree with that, and I think that's an even stronger challenge. So right now we're doing demographic analysis, and we're estimating parameters that are generalized to the whole population, and we don't know if they change for each individual. And of course, there are other techniques, dynamic structural equation modeling, that goes into the individuals and tests whether the reciprocal effects vary per individual. I think that's maybe we're getting there today, but I didn't see much research doing this kind of contrast between RI-CLPM and dynamic modeling. But it would be, of course, we could test formally whether the effects that we identify with the RI-CLPM, they are robust to idiographic disaggregation, if we might say, idiographic perspective. And I would very much enjoy to read work doing this kind of contrast. I just haven't found many yet. But I think that Herb, with a colleague, I forgot his name, did that kind of analysis with the reciprocal effects model, and they found that there was reciprocal effects as well. So it sort of looked like the models stood this test. Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there is a next question, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rosa Ylipietila from Tampere University, Finland. Thank you for a very inspiring presentation. This literature has helped me a lot with recent years when I'm trying to learn this method with random intercepts model. And my question would be that, or would you elaborate on researching phenomena that are very trait-like, or for example, teacher's identity that has very few temporal changes and is very stable, because I would be interested in looking what kind of phenomena affects on maintaining this kind of very stable trait-like phenomenon. And for example, I had this model that I tried to, for example, teacher identity. There was no significant auto-regressions found there, even though I thought that there might be, if there would be temporal changes, there would be found some significant relations. But do you get the idea of, do you think this is still a good way to also examine effects on very trait-like phenomena?
So I would say that from a causal inference perspective, we're looking to find a variance that is exogenous to see whether it influences. So, trying to gather my thoughts. With an experimental design, if we could modify these traits, which are not very modifiable, if I understand correctly, you might have this of exogeneity with the treatment effect, right? Which would be the source of change. When you don't have that, you need a source of change that is of another nature, which I argued was dynamic. So if you do not have the source of exogeneity dynamically, I don't see how you could do it very well using these techniques, because if there is no variability, which you just said, there's no states, if I understand correctly, then you cannot extract this source of exogeneity with the modeling approach we discussed. Now, from a more practical point of view, you could. I think you need to go towards between-person modeling approaches that focus more on the trajectories of change, maybe. So perhaps there isn't much variability across the measurement points in terms of deviations from the random intercept or trait. But perhaps there are trajectories of growth in these identity construction related processes. Is that it? So you could look perhaps at other models such as the latent curve growth modeling and see by varied kinds, and see whether the initial levels in one construct are related to the growth in the other construct. That could provide an approximation to what you're looking for. But still, with these models, they are descriptive in nature. They don't have the same causal strengths as RICLPM. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you.
And then there's one on the back, please.
Thank you very much for the great talk, and I really like all the points you made. And I have one conceptual question or like a comment when it's about reciprocal effects. And in education psychology, people like reciprocal effects. And when I talk to people who work on it, I got the kind of sense that people imagine this kind of data. So skills influence self-concept, skills increases self-concept, self-concept increases skills. As a result, there's a kind of Matthew effect, a snowball effect. They reinforce each other, they increase over time. But when you simulate the data from cross-legged panel model or random intercept cross-legged model or whatever, actually they stay the same. So there's a big difference between what people imagine as a reciprocal effect and what statistical model says. So do you have any thoughts or comments about it?
Yes. When I thought about it, I was very depressed at the time. We discussed it in our paper, the paper that was awarded. By the way, I'm a very big fan of your work. So yes, so it relates to the idea, I think, that our theories talk about the developmental trends, the trajectories, but these modeling approaches relate to the residuals that depart from these trajectories. And therefore, there's a gap between the evidence and the theory. I don't have clear answers to that dilemma today. For some time, I thought that that we had to look into the bivariate latent growth curve model, which I just mentioned. But then I think, so to put it into perspective, I think it will. It really depends on the stage of development that we're looking at. Because as I tried to illustrate with the graph, when you're acquiring skills or self-perception or something, so at the beginning there's probably trends of growth, and then it might stabilize. And perhaps when it stabilizes, these methods may correspond to the theory, and we just need to adapt the theory to the stage of development. So that would be one answer, that we need to differentiate in our theories at which point in time we're talking about in terms of reciprocal influences between these constructs. So that would be my answer, and then it also relates to the research goals we have. If we really want to have a strong causal inference, these models seem more appropriate. And we might use this evidence as corroborating other kinds of evidence and have an overall view of the validity of the theory. So that would be my answer. And I think that there was a critique of the EARLI CLPM a few years back by Orth and colleagues that stated something similar and said that we should not discard the CLPM because it actually is closer to the trajectories we're talking about in the theories than the EARLI CLPM, what you just said. Still, I see from the convergence effects and all the illusory effects that you can find with the CLPM, I do not trust the CLPM very much, because you don't really know where the source of variance is coming from and whether the effects are positive or negative or significant, not significant, even if you're focusing on a between-person perspective. So that would be my answer. But I would love to hear yours afterwards.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
I doubt it.
First of all, thank you for raising awareness of this topic. Everyone benefits from this and the broader discussion you're bringing forward. But given the fact we have a lot of impressionable, perhaps younger researchers here, I wouldn't mind hearing from you, given your plea for more precision regarding our theories, how exactly you think self-concept drives skills.
What is my current view on this theory?
Yeah, how do you theoretically connect self-concept to skills development?
So yes. So there is a communication I'll be doing this afternoon that goes right into the core of the theory. So the question you're asking, what are the intermediate processes linking the two? No, in theoretical terms? So in a nutshell, I think that we can mobilize, so you're asking about how the links in between the two, right? So I think that, so if I return to this finding, so this is the current view I share with some people on how they relate to each other. There's a fast effect of skills on academic self-concept, and this afternoon I will present this, and the idea is that intermediate processes can be those of teacher feedback or achievement emotions. which are closer in time, and they immediately impact how we feel about our skills. So that's an intermediate process that would be faster. And the intermediate processes for the other direction would be in terms of engagement behavior and motivational regulation, which take longer to evolve because, for example, with engagement you have emotional, behavioral, cognitive facets, and for them to shift in a coordinated way, it takes more time. And that would be the intermediate process I see today between the two. I don't know if I've answered your question, but mostly it's we find answers in other motivational theories because I think that this model is actually shared by most motivational theories. Where they differ is on the intermediate processes they propose for linking the two. Did I answer your question, Luke? Yeah?
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? I see no more hands, so I think that we have got a lot of food for our thoughts for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
And for
Yeah.
And from the behalf of EARLI, we really want to thank you, and you don't only need to have the food for the thoughts because there is something really to eat also over here.
Thank you so much. This is great. I know a 2-year-old who will really enjoy this. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You were so great.